Guys, I have 44 tips and settings for the DJI Air 3S. What's going on, guys? My name is Dan Davis and I'm the creative director here on DansTube.TV. For the first handful of tips, we're checking out the flight menu. Now, the flight menu is basically the menu that you launch into straight away when you see the camera feed. And so here, I'm going to show you tip number 1, which is the face tracking and face focus. Now, this is brand new. I've never seen this before on a DJI drone, but you can see on my face, there's a box and it's tracking my face as I'm moving around. So this is a really cool new feature because it means that I'm always going to be in focus and that it's always tracking my face. So this is a very handy feature. You can also jump into the 3x zoom and you can see it's still tracking my face. Even with a lot of layers behind me, I'm still the focus of this shot. So if you are looking to get some really cool photos, videos, all sorts of content, and you've got a few people with you, this is great for peace of mind because you know that you're always going to be in focus and your face is always going to be tracked. This just seems to be on by default. It was the first thing I noticed immediately when I launched the Air 3S. For tip number 2, this is the pre-flight menu or the flight list menu, whatever you want to call it. Just in the top left corner, you can see there's an arrow. It says N mode and then it says in flight because the drone's in flight. It's going to say different things depending on if the drone is grounded, if it's flying, if there's any errors. But if you tap where it says in flight, it actually brings up the flight checklist. Now, we've got a few options in here. This is actually where you're going to go to see if there are any errors. But in here, you can also adjust the auto return to home altitude, max altitude and max distance. Now, these for the most part you can leave. The only thing that I would recommend changing would be the auto return to home altitude. Now for me, it's at 100 meters. This just means that when you are returning back to home, if you press the return to home button, the drone's going to launch up and go above all the tree lines, all the buildings, and stay at 100 meters, for example, before it comes back to you. So that's a handy one. And then max altitude and max distance, you can change these if you want to just start practicing in a nice contained area. You can always pull these down and keep it into a nice contained area so that you can fly safely or even show someone how to fly and you have to worry about them flying too far. For tip number 3 here, I'm going to show you how to enable the FocusTrack mode. Now there are a few different ways to enable FocusTrack, which is very exciting, but the first way I'm going to show you is just with your finger, press and hold and drag, and it's going to create the box. You draw it over the subject, and you can see I'm automatically now in the FocusTrack mode, but you can create it on anything. I can just go with this pole here, for example, draw a little box around it, and now it means that this pole is now the focus point. So for tip number 4 here, this is a really cool tip. A lot of people don't know this one, and every time I tell someone, they're like, I had no idea that this was a thing. But you can actually use the touch screen to control the camera. So all you do for this one is you press and hold on the screen, it will vibrate and bring up a little bit of an interface, and then you just drag your finger. So you drag down if you want to look down, you drag up if you want to look up. You can drag to the right and to the left. You don't have too much range of motion on the Air 3S to look left and right, but you can look up on an angle as well. So you've got some really cool controls here, and this just makes it a little bit easier if you want to have, you know, maybe more control over one of the sticks. Maybe you want to continue flying forward, and then you can press and hold on the screen and adjust the camera as well. So it's just a handy thing to know if you want to control the camera with the touchscreen. Now, tip number 5 is the waypoints. Now, this is a really simple one to enable. There's a little waypoints icon on the left-hand side of the flight menu. You can tap on that, and it will bring up the waypoints interface. Now, this is a really clean interface. You can literally just adjust the point of interest. You can adjust where you want the waypoints to be. You can also tap on the map as well. And then once you launch the map into the larger interface, you can then tap where you want waypoints to go. So that's how I like to plan it. There are a few other ways of controlling the waypoints, but this just gives you a little bit more control over, you know, where you want the waypoints to be positioned. You can then have the point of interest in the middle, for example. And as you tap on each waypoint, you have full control to change, you know, whatever it is that you need to change here. So there's a bunch of options here, and it's really easy to use. Tip number 6 here, this is a brand new one for the Air 3S. Now we actually have a dedicated ActiveTrack button now, which was definitely needed. You can see it's off to the left-hand side, just underneath the waypoints. So you can tap on that, and it will actually say FocusTrack enabled, and then it'll bring up a plus where I am. So I can now tap on the plus, and it will automatically start tracking me from there. If there's a lot of subjects around, there'll be a lot of different pluses around that you can tap on. So you can see none of the trees are being identified, but if there's boats, cars, people, it's going to come up with a bunch of different pluses there, and then you can press it again to disable it. For tip number 7 here, these are all of the FocusTrack modes. So once you tap on the FocusTrack mode, or once you draw the box around the person, it will actually bring up a few options. So by default, it goes to Spotlight, which is basically just the drone following you as you walk around. You can go with the point of interest, which then gives you the control for the drone to rotate around you, for example. That's a really cool feature. feature as well. And then in the ActiveTrack mode, this is where you can enable the ActiveTrack 360. So this gives you a bunch of control to have the drone following in all sorts of directions. You can also put it in the auto mode, for example, and it will just automatically follow you from whatever way you think is relevant for it to follow you. So this is really cool. And yeah, I've got a bunch of content on the channel to show you ActiveTrack 360. If you are interested in the DJI Air 3S, then make sure to check out my links down in the video description. If you're based in Australia, then go over to DJI Australia's website, which is d1store.com.au. You can use the code DansTube over there to save on most drones, cameras, and accessories. I also will have some other links down below for my international audience, as well as some drone bundles. So make sure to check out those links down below. For tip number 8, this is the auto exposure lock. So all you have to do for this one is you tap where you want the auto exposure lock to be. And then once you've got that box there, you press and hold in the middle of the box and it will come up with auto exposure locked. So then it's locked in the auto exposure for that location over there. I can then tap again to disable it. And then once I'm happy again, maybe on the grass, press and hold, and it's going to lock in again. For tip number 9, I'm going to show you some of the different ways that you can interact with the map interface and some of the different settings that are available through here. So in the bottom left corner, there is a map icon. You can tap on that to make the map larger, tap on it again to make the map the focus, and then the flight menu or the video feed will be in the bottom left corner, so it will replace it. This is where you can see the whole map here. I can tap back on the video feed to then put the map into the bottom left corner. So that's how you can play around with the map. There's a few little buttons there to adjust orientation. You can also zoom in a little bit, or you can tap to pull the map away. But then there's this little icon in the bottom right of the map, and this brings up the attitude indicator. So this is really cool because it kind of lets you know what your drone is experiencing. So you can see as I'm rotating, well, you probably can't see, but I'm actually rotating the drone left and right, and you can see it's actually banking up with that little icon there to let you know that the drone is going on an angle. And so it also kind of gives you a little bit of an indicator of how much resistance the drone is battling when it is flying in the air. Now for tip number 10, it's kind of a continuation on from the attitude indicator. So again, in the bottom right hand corner of the attitude indicator, you tap on that and it'll actually bring up the vision assist. So this now lets you know what all of the different obstacle avoidance sensors are seeing. So you can look behind you can look to the right, you can look directly below you. And so this is really handy for safety, just to see what's happening in the area. It is in black and white and it isn't the highest quality, but it just gives you a chance to have a glance from all the different sensors to see if there's anything in the area you need to be aware of. For tip number 11 now, I'm just going to show you how to enable the Pro mode. So in the bottom right corner, it will be set to auto by default. You can tap on that and it will change it into the Pro mode. Now this gives you full control over ISO, shutter, also the EV as well. And then you can click to see the different resolutions, the white balance, all sorts of things. And you can also change the color options here, normal, HLG, D-Log-M, and you can see the format and the coding format. So on that same point, I also wanted to show you how to enable the vertical video, because you can enable vertical video through here. Now, once you tap on the resolution and FPS, you'll see there's an option for 2.7K and it says 9:16. So 9:16 is the vertical video format, and we can actually go up to 60 frames per second at 2.7K 9:6. And you can see it now actually basically darkens out the areas that won't be included in the video, and then it highlights where the video is going to be focused in on. So this is really cool, and you can still see that the face tracking is working here. It's still tracking my face, but it's showing me what's going to be in the 9:16 video. Moving on to the autofocus and manual focus options. So by default, it's on AF, which is autofocus. I can tap on that to take it into manual focus, but it doesn't really seem to give us too much. It doesn't really show us what's going on. So I can press and hold where it says MF, and I can drag my finger up and down, and you can see the focus is adjusting now. So I can adjust it to get a different focal point depending on what I'm looking for here. Most of the time I just leave it on AF, but if you wanted to know, you just press and hold on AF and then drag your finger to adjust into the manual focus options. So now when we're looking at the zoom options, so you can see just above where it says AF, there's a 1x. So I can tap on that and it can take it into 2x. As you can see, that's going into digital zoom. So 1x is just the wide camera angle. If we press 3x, it will go into the medium telephoto camera system. I can then press that again and it will go to 6x, press it again and it will go into 9x. So you've actually got 9x zoom here. From 3 to 9, it is digital zoom. So 3 is where the focal length of the camera, that telephoto camera system is, and the 1x is for the wide camera system. Or you can also press and hold where it says 1x and then drag your finger down. So this is where you can actually go up to 2.9x, as you can see. So up to 2.9x, it's in digital zoom, and when it's on the 3x, that is the medium telephoto system. I can then press and hold on 3x and drag it to get the different zoom length that I'm looking for here. And you can see it gives you some equivalents. So it's saying at 6x it's 144 millimeters, and at 9x it's 216 millimeters. So this is just really handy if you want just a little bit more zoom. Keep in mind it does go into the digital visual zoom realm here, but it is still very useful to have. So for tip number 14, I've got some additional information here. Now in the top right corner, before we go into the other menus, you can see we've got some different icons here. So I'm just going to show you what they all mean and what you can do with them. So you can actually tap on all of them. So where it says 32, I can tap on that, and that tells me how many satellites I have enabled. So I have 32 satellites that it's connected to, and it's saying it's got a strong signal. I can tap on the icon to the left of it, and that will bring up the sensing system. So if I, for example, go in here and I turn off obstacle avoidance, you can now see it changes and it lets me know that it's all been disabled. So this is just a handy at a glance thing to know what obstacle avoidance sensors are enabled. And then we've got RC, which is the remote controller signal. We can see it's strong right now. And then where the battery icon is, I can tap on that, and that actually gives me a percentage, right? So we're at 34%, but I can see that in 6 minutes, it's going to return to home. In 8 minutes, it's going to force a landing. And at 10 minutes 55, it's going to be completely depleted. And so that's the danger zone. You don't want to get anywhere near there. But this is just a handy at a glance info to tap on just to see a little bit more information about the battery life. Okay, so we're moving on to the safety menu now. So in the top right corner, you'll see there are 3 dots. I can tap on that and it'll bring up the safety menu. So for tip number 15, we're going to talk about the obstacle avoidance settings. So we can see it says flight assistance, and then we can see that obstacle avoidance action is off. So that means that right now, if I flew towards a tree, it wouldn't notice the tree and it would hit the tree. So the other option I have is brake. So if I fly towards a tree and it notices a tree, it's going to brake, it's going to stop, and it's just going to hover. Now bypass, which is my favorite one, this one will actually bypass the tree and continue on the path. So this one is the one I use all the time, purely because it gives a dynamic kind of viewing perspective, and it does a really good job of avoiding obstacles. An added mention within the obstacle avoidance settings is the bypassing option. So you can then go into nifty, which is going to be a bit more dynamic again, but it does give you a warning because it's a little bit more risky. So leave it in normal by default, or you can go to nifty if you want some more dynamic movements when it is bypassing. Tip number 16 is the flight protection, and this is the altitude and distance. So as you keep scrolling down, you can see we've got max altitude and we've got max distance. Now this is what I was talking about right at the beginning of the video. So you can adjust these if you want to give someone a chance to fly the drone, for example. But you just want to limit them to 20 meters. They can only fly 20 meters away from the controller. You can also adjust the max altitude. 120 meters is the legal height you can fly to, but you can pull that down again if you want for whatever reason. If you do try to increase it, it comes up with a warning letting you know that it is a breach of laws and regulations. Tip number 17 is the advanced return to home. So as you scroll down, you'll see there's a few options here. We've got the optimal and we've got the preset. So preset is going to go with preset option of the auto return to home altitude. As we can see here, it's at 100 meters, which is what I'd recommend, anywhere from 80 meters to 100 meters. Or you can go into the optimal right here. So optimal is definitely the one to keep it in, and just make sure that your return to home altitude is at anywhere from 80 meters to 100 meters. Tip number 18 is the auto return to home altitude. So I've got it set at 100 right now. I would recommend anywhere from 80 meters to 100 meters. This just means that if you press return to home, it's going to fly up to 100 meters and then it's going to start flying home to you. So this just means that it's going to be safer if there are lots of trees and buildings around. Make sure that you've got the auto return to home altitude nice and high so that you don't have to worry about any issues. Tip number 19 is the AR settings. Now this is augmented reality settings. This is where you can actually see the home point, which is very, very handy. We can show the AR return to home route, and this actually gives you a pathway to let you know which way the drone is going to fly home. Very handy to see. And then we also get show AR aircraft shadows. So this will just point the camera down and it will show you the shadow of the drone to give you a rough idea of where the drone's going to land. So tip number 20, if we just go back and scroll down, we've got a few options for sensors. So we've got compass and we've got IMU. So this is where you can actually calibrate some of your sensors, and I would recommend doing this, especially if there's a warning there, or even if you go back and you see up here where it says takeoff permitted. If there's any issue up here, make sure that you go in and you calibrate your sensors. Tip number 21 is the battery info. So as you scroll down, you will see we've got battery info. We can tap on that. It gives you how many cycles the battery's gone through. It gives you the cell status. So this is where you can see all 4 cells are nice and healthy. They're all very, very similar. If there's any like variation where one's really low, one's really high, for example, that's where you might have some damage to the battery. So you might need to return it. It gives you battery temperature and battery voltage. So very, very handy information to know. You don't need to check it all the time, but it's just good to know where it is and to see if there's any issues with the batteries. Tip number 22 is just a little bit further down. on. So I'm not going to mention the auxiliary LED because by default it's on auto, and that's the one I would recommend. But for aircraft LEDs, this is tip number 22, I would actually suggest putting it onto auto. This means that when you start capturing a video, the lights are going to turn off at the front of the aircraft. So this can just be really handy if you're flying in like a low light situation. The camera might pick up on the lights flashing at the front. So putting it on auto will just mean that they'll be on when you're flying to the location. Right when you press record, it will actually disable the lights so that the camera is just focusing in on whatever it needs to focus on. Tip number 23 is a little bit lower, and it's called Find My Drone. You can tap on that and it will actually show you where the drone is. So it'll show you the last video that was recorded with the drone, which was just before, pretty close to where I am now. I also have the option to use other maps, so I can click on that and it will take me to Apple Maps or Google Maps. So if I have lost it, I can then click on one of those and take me into my preferred map. And then I can press on start flashing and beeping. And you will hear it's very, very noisy, but it will let you know where the drone is if it's in a bush or it's hidden away. Start pressing that and it will just let you know where the drone is. Tip number 24 is right at the bottom of the safety menu. It's called Advanced Safety Settings. Now, if I tap on it, I'll bring up a few different options here. The top two I would leave just as the default. So if the signal's lost, it's going to return to home, and the emergency propeller stop is for emergency only. You can change them to any time. And up here, you can change the signal loss to descend as well as hover, but return to home and emergency only are definitely the two to leave on. And then as you scroll down, you've got a few options here. So the main one is Air Sense. Just making sure that Air Sense is enabled. It'll let you know if there's any aircraft in the area, and it'll actually pop up on the map. So that's very handy for safety. Vision positioning and obstacle sensing, you can disable this. It's very, very trippy. Basically, it allows you to fly down really low to the ground, and it actually disables the vision positioning, which is underneath the drone. So that normally checks out what's underneath the drone so that it stops at a certain point, and then you have to hold down on the left stick to force the landing. If you disable that, the drone can literally like crash down to the ground and bounce off the ground. So I wouldn't recommend it in most scenarios, but for whatever reason, if you need to fly really low and you are an experienced pilot and there's no one around and you want to get some nice low shots, something like that is really cool. But make sure that you just leave both of those on in most situations. We're going to move on to the control menu now. So if we just tap on that, this is the control menu here. And for tip number 25, we're going to have a look at the FocusTrack settings. So as we go down a little bit, we can see FocusTrack settings. Now these are great. I would highly recommend playing around with these. This is for the ActiveTrack 360. It gives you a bunch of control for both person and for vehicle. So as we go down, we can go between the outer circle and the inner circle when we're doing the 360 ActiveTrack, but then we can change the radius, right? So we can change the inner radius, we can change the outer radius, so we can change that all the way up to 20 meters. Inner radius, I think the lowest is 4 meters by the looks of it. So that's the range that you can go within there, and you can customize that as you see fit. You've then got inner height, so you can adjust that if you want it to fly a little bit lower or a little bit higher when it's on the inner circle, and the outer height, again, higher or lower depending on what you're looking for here. Very handy. And then you've got camera motion, so you can adjust that to normal or to fast, and the near ground flight. So when enabled, aircraft can descend to an altitude below 2 meters when tracking subject. So when you enable that one, again, keep all of these in mind. You've got to be very safe when you're doing this, but you do have a bunch of options in here. So leaving it on the default is fine, but you can come in here and play around with it. And even on vehicle, you've got a few options here. You can just change the camera motion from normal to fast. Tip number 26 is the gain and expo tuning. Now, this is something that a lot of people have asked about in previous videos. It's basically the gimbal controls, right? Or the gimbal speed, which a lot of people were confused by the change of names. But this is actually where you go in to change a lot of the gimbal settings. So you can go from cine to normal to sport, and you can see as I go between them, they've all got different parameters for the max horizontal speed and max ascent speed. So we can go through and change all of those, as you can see, brake sensitivity, all of that good stuff. But now when we get down a little bit further, this is where we have the option for the Expo. So we can change the pitch and roll. So as I adjust that, you will see the graph will adjust. As I go down, I can control the control speed of the tilt. So that's the gimbal control speed. So if I just adjust up and down, you can see on the left-hand side there, it's pretty fast. If I go right down, really slow, like very, very slow. And if I go to max, it's like instant. Very full on. So that's the gimbal control there for the control speed. And then the smoothness, so I can put that right up. So that means that there's going to be a little bit of a trail effect. When I let go of the stick, it's going to slowly trail to make it look a little bit more cinematic. Now, if I pull that right down, you'll see it's more jarring, it's more jumpy. So you can play around with these. There is an option to reset everything. So definitely have a play around with the gimbal settings here. The other stuff you might not need to change too much. Some of this stuff up here is nice to play around with. But again, keep in mind you can change it for all three options, cine, normal, and sport. Now for tip number 27, we're looking at the FPV mode. So as we scroll down, we've got gimbal mode and we've got it in follow right now. So if I just lift the drone up, you'll see as I rotate the drone and move it around, it's all very smooth. Now I'm moving the drone in all sorts of crazy ways and it looks extremely smooth. Straight when I tap on the 3 dots again and go into FPV mode, you'll now see that as I turn the drone, so I'm turning the drone left and right, it's got more of a banking effect. So it gives you more of that FPV effect while still having the control of a drone that's just going to hover and fly as safely as possible. So this does give a cool effect and it's very simple to just enable and disable through the settings. So definitely check out the FPV mode. Tip number 28 is the gimbal calibration. So if we tap on that one, it then will take you through the prompts of how to calibrate. You can click on manual and you can actually adjust the horizon and the yaw. So this is really handy if you have any sort of like horizon issues. But for the most part, I would suggest going in, clicking on gimbal calibration, and then just going with the auto and letting it do its thing. Tip number 29 now, the final tip in the control menu. As you scroll down, we have some options here for button customization. Now, depending on what controller you have will depend on what this little display looks like here. So for me, it's just a press or a double press with the FN button to go between the different modes. Now we've got recenter gimbal, which is the default, but there's a bunch of different options here, as you can see. You can plan a waypoint flight, you can change from follow to FPV mode, you can have the AE lock or unlock, increase EV, decrease EV, and camera settings as well. So I've changed it to camera settings, so now when I press FN, it takes me straight into the camera settings, as you can see. And then if I click on the double press one, you can see I've got a similar offering here, but it does actually add even more options. So this is where you have a bunch of different controls. So we can even just leave it as none. You can go to vision assist, which is really cool. So if I just quickly go to vision assist and now double tap, it's going to bring up the vision assist. It's not going to show me because the drone's not flying right now. The one that I would recommend, which is really cool, which is a whole feature on its own, is called cruise control. Now we'll have some video showing you right now what cruise control looks like, but it means that any input you put into the drone, straight when you press cruise control, so I might be accelerating forward and increasing in altitude, straight when I press cruise control, it's just going to continue doing those 2 stick inputs that I put it in. So I can do all sorts of things. I can put in like multiple different directions and inputs with the sticks, and then straight when I tap the FN button twice, it will go straight into cruise control and it will just continue on that pathway. So we're now moving across to the camera menu. So you just tap across here, and here's the camera menu. So tip number 30 is the color settings, and by default it's on normal, which is great. It does the job for most people and it looks great. But you can also go across to HLG and then D-Log-M, and this is where you're going to get even more out of the drone. It's just going to give you way more control in your post-production workflow. Now the thing that is cool is you can have color display assist on or off. So if I turn it off, there's going to be a lot of information in that video, so you can play around with it on your editing suite and you're going to get way more out of the video. But I can just enable the display assist, so it's going to give me a rough idea of the color representation so that I'm not flying in basically black and white. So that's really handy, but D-Log-M is definitely one of the preferable ones to go with. Otherwise, just leave it in normal if you don't want to edit too much in your post-production workflow. Tip number 31 is, as you keep scrolling down, the histogram. Now, as you enable this, you will see the histogram comes up and I can now move that around. Now, I can't change the size of it. I can't pinch to zoom or anything like that, but I can move it to wherever I need to move it. And this will give me a representation of what's happening in the image. So for example, if I go into here and maybe I go into the ISO and I start adjusting it, you'll see it's very overexposed now, and you can see the graph goes off to the far right hand side because it's extremely overexposed. If I pull it down, it's going to go with the normal bell-shaped curve here, which is very handy. That's what you're looking for, basically, that exact graph there. Good idea is just to go into auto when you've got the histogram on, just to see what the drone is doing by default. And then once you go into the pro mode, you want to basically try to replicate that, and then you can really get used to how to get more out of the image. Tip number 32, as we go back in, I would recommend going and enabling the overexposure warning. So as the name suggests, it will just let you know if things are overexposed. So an example here, as I was showing you before, if I start to overexpose it, it's just going to blur out the entire screen and it's not going to be usable. So that's where it's at by default. There will be some overexposure warnings because we've got a lot of clouds in the distance, but I find that this just gives you a little bit more information to go off just to make sure that the image isn't overexposed. Tip number 33 is the grid lines. So you've got a few different options here. You can tap on them to enable them. So you can see we've now got the grid lines, and we've also got a crosshair right in the middle to let us know where the center point is. This is the one that I prefer, having these two enabled, the rule of thirds or the grid lines, and then you've got the crosshair in the middle for the center point. Tip number 34 is the frame guide. So by default it's off. But if you go in here, you can see there's a bunch of different guides. Now 9:16, which is the vertical content, as you tap on that, it's actually going to just give you a guide. So by default, it's just going to actually record horizontally. So it'll record the entire frame, but it'll give you a guide of where the 9:16 in the center is going to be. So maybe you're capturing a lot of content and you want to also think about your social media content as well, your vertical content for the other socials. Handy to have that frame guide on, and you can go with different ones. So let's say 1:1, for example. Again, just gives us a reference of what that 1:1 is going to look like, but it's still going to record everything outside of that frame guide. Tip number 35 is the peaking level. And so this is related to the manual focus mode. So let's just go with high, for example, just to show you. So straight when I press MF, we can now see that it's actually giving us the focus. So as you see, as I press and hold, like I showed you in those early settings, I can now drag and I can adjust that focus point, and it's gonna give me a reference of what's in focus. If I want to go with manual focus, this is really handy because this is a high grade camera system. It's not just a drone. So something like this just gives you a little bit more customization if you do want to go into manual focus. Tip number 36 is called style. So as we scroll down, we have the white balance options, which you can click on manual if you want and play around with those, or you can just leave it in auto. But the style is what I really like here, because this gives you some more control over your sharpness. You can go down to -2, or you can go up to +2. And so if you go to -2, that means that you can add sharpness in post-production, for example. Also with noise reduction, you can go down to -2 or just to +2. And again, really handy just to play around with these. You can leave it on the default, but it does give you a little bit more control if you want to play around with sharpness and noise reduction. Tip number 37 is just below, and it's basically where you can format your SD card and internal storage. So you'll see there's a blue button there, tap on format, and then you choose which one you want to format. So either the internal storage or the SD card. Really easy to go in here, tap on format, and then format whichever one you're looking for. And that's probably the best way to go about finding it. So we're now moving to the transmission menu, which doesn't have too many settings here, but I'm just going to show you a few things here. So for tip number 38, I'm just going to show you how to change the frequency. So by default, it's on dual band. And as you scroll down, it'll actually let you know all the different frequencies in the area. The drone has to be grounded to see all of this information. But you can then swap into 5.8 gigahertz if for whatever reason you're noticing you're having issues with it. You can go into that and then go into 2.4 gigahertz to see what the interference is like in the area. By default though, just leave it on dual band in pretty much all situations, but that's just if you want to see the different interferences in the area. Tip number 39 is just an extension of that. So as you scroll down, you can actually just see the bandwidth, and then you can also see the graph here, which is showing you the different interference in the area. So this is how you view it. Again, the drone has to be grounded to view this information, but I would suggest going in here if you're noticing you're having any issues with range, for example, if the drone's dropping out of range really quickly, come in here and see how much interference is going on, and this graph will keep activating in real time or reacting in real time to show you what's happening. We're now moving on to the About menu over here, and again, not many settings in here, but still very handy to know. So for tip number 40, I'm going to show you how to manually check for updates. So firstly, we've got the aircraft firmware. We can tap on that. We'll say checking version. And I know there is an update here, but we'll just wait and see what it does. And it will pop up very soon with the update that is available. There we go. So new firmware available. So I can click on update. We'll just cancel that for now. If we click on fly safe data as well, and also manually check here if there are any updates. For tip number 41, I'm going to show you how to reset the drone and clear the data. So as you scroll all the way down, you got the option to reset all settings, and then you can also clear all data. So this is handy if you're about to sell your drone. Make sure that you unlink your account from the drone, and then come in here and you can reset all the settings, and you can also clear all the data, and it will basically take it back to a factory reset drone. Now moving on to the bonus tips now. I've got 3 final tips in the bonus tips, and it's located in the profile menu. So when we go back to the flight menu here, press the arrow in the top left corner, it will take you back to this menu. Now from here you can click on profile down the bottom, and you can click on settings. And now in here for tip number 42, I will show you the firmware auto download. So this is really cool if you're not worried about actually seeing a lot of the information behind the scenes. For me, I leave this off because I actually want to see what the update includes. But let's say, for example, you just want it to download automatically in the background. You can enable it here. It's going to automatically download the firmware, and it's just going to save you a bit of time when you are ready to update it. Tip number 43, this one's really cool. Actually, you can click on camera view and then enable the auto enter camera view. So basically when the app automatically enters the camera view when the aircraft is connected. So straight when you've got the controller connected up to the drone, it will go straight into the camera view. You don't have to go into go fly. You don't have to tap another button. It will just take you straight into the camera view. So this is a really cool setting to play with. And then for the final tip, tip number 44, this is how you can clear the cache. So where it says clear cache, we can click on that, And there's a few different options. So we've got app cache, we've got aircraft flight record cache, and we've got local log. So these can start to fill up, and you will notice that it will start to increase the size of the actual app itself. So if you notice that your phone is running out of storage, for example, if you are using the combo like the RCN3 with your phone, it will start to fill up. So just come in here and start to clear the cache. All right, guys, so that is my 44 tips and settings for the DJI Air 3S. Hopefully you learned some new stuff in here, and let me know in the comments below if there's anything else that you would recommend. I appreciate all the support, guys, and I'll chat to you in the next one. Peace.